With the Russians no longer able to advance in the direction of Pokrovsk, they put their focus further to the south and try to straighten their positions there and gain better logistical positions. At the same time, the Ukrainians managed to advance in some minor positions, but there's good news for them as well. More international aid is coming, and we even have informations that there is a production being started, or at least in developments, for new air defense systems and missiles for Ukraine. But we'll talk about this as well as about anything else that has happened over the past few days in relation to the war in Ukraine in this situation report. We'll start off with the Kursk region. There we have a video of the third bridge over the same river in Karis. Here we see that the bridge is actually still standing, but as you can see, driving over it takes some balls. Even here is damage, which is patched up with wood, and that person actually drives a car over this. You have to honor who is brave enough to do this. So we can see that at least cars can apparently, under some circumstances, still use the bridge at this point. We have them walking here at a later point, and there we can see the damage in its detail. The area really is as big as no bigger than the wheel difference, the axle width of a car. That's what's left of the bridge at Karis. This is the bridge that is on this here over the same river. This one was also hit, and Glushkovo was also hit, and the Ukrainians strike all the pontoon bridges that are currently being built. Apart from that, nothing has changed. The expectation remains that this area will, in the long run, fall to the Ukrainians, as the Russians will not be able to supply their forces in there sufficiently once the local stocks run out. Further to the east, the Russians are attacking towards Pogrepi. We have a geolocation at this point where the Russians have reached the northern parts of the town. This is roughly here. So we have the Russians advancing into area that was so far being considered under Ukrainian control. The Ukrainians at the same time managed to advance a little bit further to the east into the tree lines here. We have a geolocation of this as well, that they managed to settle, that they managed to take positions here, because there they are being shelled by the Russians. So the Ukrainians reach this point, the Russians roughly reach this point. Changes are more or less like this. What we have in confirmation, nothing major has changed in this direction. Then we have a new geolocation from the south of Borki, the small town of Spanoye. Here we have the Russians striking the Ukrainians while they're building a fortification in here. Now, if we look at the fortification, we see the house here, and this is the tree line, and this is the road. House, tree line, road. The fortification is here. It feels at least like it's directed towards the south at this point. So this here is the direction the Ukrainians are facing in. This could mean that Spanoye is fully under Ukrainian control, but this much as simply from that geolocation I can't confirm. We have the Ukrainians at this point here. Let me quickly recheck. Yeah, it's the Ukrainians are at this point and have built fortifications here. So they have consolidated their control over this point, which should mean that the blue area is at the very least up to here. Whether this means that the Ukrainians control all of the town is uncertain, but the size of the fortification would at least imply it to me. So I would guess that Spalnoye is under Ukrainian control as of now. That was it from the area of Kursk, so still not much of a change. Even that position in Spalnoye, we do not know if it's a fresh position. The geolocation, the video we see here, this doesn't look like it's taken, that it was dug within the last 24 hours. So this seems to be an older position that was taken here by the Ukrainians. This could mean that the Ukrainians were under control of this area the whole time. So far, no serious change in the overall position. As expected, as said in the past few weeks, the front line will settle for some time, and unless the Ukrainians deploy deploy fresh reserves to try to gain the full initiative there again, to try to achieve a new breakthrough. The overall changes in territory should not be too big. Here in the northern front, we have a change. The Ukrainians actually managed to push the Russians somewhat back. We have a geolocation here at Liptsi. It's already here on the map. The location I just showed you was at this point. So the Ukrainians retook at least part of that forested area here south of Liboke. Overall, some advance for the Ukrainians, but only a tactical change without bigger implications as of now. On the eastern front, we have the Russians. Additional advances by the Russians. They managed to advance here. They managed to advance in the south. And we have a geolocation of them having advanced to the area northwest of Piszczane. This is roughly here. Let me zoom in to make sure it's shown properly. This is at this point here, Piszczane to the west of it. We see this. No, I think it was here. Yeah, this is where the point is. So this fell to the Russians. The southern area fell to the Russians. This fell to the Russians. At this point, the front line is probably like this. This is important for the Ukrainians as the Russians are now only 4.8 kilometers away from the Oskil. If they reach this, it's not as dramatic as if they reach the bridge here or the dam over the reservoir, as it would cut the lines of supplies. But cutting the Ukrainian beachhead over the Oskil in two is obviously a disadvantageous event, so the Ukrainians will try to prevent that in the near future. We have some changes here in the area of Stemalchivka as well. There, the Russians, the maps are just adjusted for new Russian positions. We had it more fragmented. I think the last map still shows it. Yeah, we had it more fragmented lately. The Russians took empty Ukrainian positions. The Ukrainians withdrew from some positions here, as obviously this is a threat of encirclement that was avoided by withdrawing in local positions here. Overall, the biggest event here is clearly the Russian push towards the Oskil River. They will have no choice but to advance their entry into the Ukrainian lines to the sides. We see it here at Stemalchivka that they try to do that to secure their flanks, but they are getting close to the Oskil, and that will be a problem for the Ukrainians. South of the Siversky Donetsk, we have the Russians attacking towards Siversk. I do not see any change in territory here, but they have taken the town of Kalinivka especially, and that's the important thing. They took the western part of it, or the houses west of the canal here. This way they gained a foothold close to Chasiv Yar on the other side of the canal. This is a problem here at this point as well. We also have a change further south, and that is quite a surprise, especially if we take the map from Deep State, because we have a geolocation showing us the Russians here on the canal, right west of Klishchivka. So according to the geolocations, the Russians have reached this point. I said it a couple of times in the past. I do not think that the Deep State map is accurate when it comes to areas of previous counteroffensives. I don't know if that's a political thing or whatever they do, but that Klishchivka is still a contested area, that the Ukrainians still control everything up here, is simply false. We had geolocations up here, we had them here, we had them here, we had them here, we had them down here, and we had them right north of Andrivka as well at this area. Now we have the Russians here. It seems likely that at the very least the gray area, because in this case we see Russians being attacked by a drone dropping bombs on them, and thus at least one casualty on the Russian side here. This does not prove that the Russians have taken possession of this area, but it shows that the front line, this is definitely no longer under full Ukrainian control. The likely front line is probably somewhere like this by now. At least the gray zone would have to be expanded to this point. Unfortunately, the Deep State map does not seem to be up to the reality here, closing in on this. Further south, we have no changes until we are in the New York area. Here, the Deep State map claimed that the Ukrainians retook quite a territory. You can see it here. It shows the Russians gained something in the flanks and the Ukrainians retook that, and it would also solve the issue of the indicated pocket on the map. I have no visual proof of this. I have Petrenko claiming more or less the same. Petrenko is a pro-Ukrainian, so he's a Ukrainian milk blogger, pro-Kiev, but that doesn't mean like in source criticism, we have the issue that so far I only have the Ukrainian claims of success. I do not have visual evidence. Petrenko is usually fairly accurate. He is not one who sugarcoats own losses, so that gives it more credibility. As of now, I can't fully sign off on it. I think it's likely that the Ukrainians retook positions here, but as of now, I have not seen conclusive proof that leads me to 100% certainty at this point. Further west, towards Avdiivka, no further advances towards Pokrovsk. The Russians have been stopped in the area of Pokrovsk, at least for now. As said, this can change in 24 hours. We might have a significant advance to the northwest here, but we've talked about it in past situation reports that the Russians have faced 2 freshly redeployed Ukrainian brigades here that have already shown that they brought heavy weaponry with them. They have used it against the Russians, and it was to be expected that this was going to be successful. The Russians have advanced to the south, though. It seems like as they are facing stiffer resistance towards Pokrovsk, they redecided their advance here, and now they are in the process of securing their flanks. Right now, the area across it is a little over 20 kilometers. That's barely enough to place artillery in the center, more or less, but it's increasingly squeezing the Russians in a certain direction. And obviously, the resupply has to go through an area that can theoretically fully be reached with FPV drones and with artillery. And that's a weakness for the Russians. So as they can't advance rapidly further to Pokrovsk, it makes perfect sense to try to secure the flanks before they try further. And at least it seems like this is what they're currently trying to do. So we have Russian gains here. They are in the southeast of Ukrainsk, have gained roughly a kilometer and a half in this direction. We have from the north here, we have some reports of fighting at Mikhailivka as well. Even here we have recently, I saw a Russian mill blogger saying that the Ukrainians retook the southeastern part of Selidove, but this is area where I didn't see the Russians being so far yet. So the area here is a little bit unclear, but we have Ukrainian counterattacks and we have the Russians definitely not advancing further. Whether the Ukrainians were able to push them back or not, I cannot confirm as of now. So in the whole of Avdiivka area, the only success of the Russians I can confirm is this here. And here, obviously, we see where the Russians are likely aiming. They want to either reconnect towards Krasnohorivka or towards Kurakhove and Maximilianivka. Here it is 10 kilometers towards Krasnohorivka. Here it is roughly 12 kilometers. We have recent Russian advances in this direction, Ukrainian counterattacks in this area. But the most likely goal of the Russians now is to more or less cut this to secure their flank, and then they can advance further towards Pokrovsk without having any problems with their flanks in this position here. At the area down here, we have a video showing Russians in Maximilianivka. They are taken prisoner here at the eastern part of it by a Ukrainian attack at this point. Again, we are at a point where I do not see the deep state map being accurate. In the past few months, I've shown you Russian geolocations at several points in Maximilianivka, which would mean that at the very least it has to be added to the gray zone, at least temporarily. And if the Russians are already in there, Georgivka should be more or less under mostly solid control by the Russians. We do not see this on the deep state map. In this event, the Ukrainians capture Russians at this point, showing that the Russians were already there, and they were already there in basements until the Ukrainian drones came and then Ukrainian infantry to counterattack. So the Russians have recently advanced towards the west here, and this is obviously seems to be the obvious goal for them to shorten their front lines and secure their flanks towards Pokrovsk. But as said, as of now, we do see the effect the 2 fresh brigades have in the direction of Pokrovsk. So far, we do not see further advances. It's probably too early to say that the Russian advance towards Pokrovsk has failed. A lot of things can still happen, but at least for the last couple of days, it's looking significantly better in this direction. Further south, the Russians have recently advanced towards the west along the river here, west of Vuhledar, and now we have fresh claims that the Ukrainians have withdrawn from Solota Niva. I cannot confirm this. These are claims by the Russians, but we do see that the pro-Ukrainian deep state map now paints this as gray zone. And gray zone would more or less mean no, this is contested, no permanent solid control by one side. That would be an indication that the claim of Solota Niva now being abandoned by the Ukrainians might have some credence to it. This is unclear as of now. Other than that, on the Dnipro front, we have news as well. We have a geolocation of a strike against oh yeah, and this is again a geolocation I almost forgot. We have from Vuhledar here, where the Russians have taken control of the mine right next to Vuhledar. Fresh geolocations of the Russians in here, so we do know that the Russians are now in the buildings here at Vuhledar. This is where the mine is. It seems like they've consolidated their control there. They have permanent presence in here, keeping up their pressure towards Vuhledar. On the Dnipro, we have reports and a geolocation of fighting on the islands, and this is remarkable in one regard, because it shows us where the Russians are, at least temporarily. They have been here. This is the island up here, so significantly on the right bank of the main main current of the river. I don't know what the English word for that is, but we see them basically on the Ukrainian side of the river. The Russians have been here. They have been struck there and probably been taken out, but we see where the Russians operate. They operate all over the Dnipro Islands, and the fighting there is continuing. Overall, we see the Russians mostly concentrating on 2 points right now. This is the southern flank of the Pokrovsk advance and basically the southern flank of Pokrovsk and the Vuhledar region. It seems that the advance towards Pokrovsk is now going to be secured, and of course this will allow the Russians, in case they advance south, to attack all the Ukrainian fortifications that are more or less headed towards the east here, by simply attacking them from the flank. And this should be a Russian goal, to push the Ukrainians further away, more or less like this. If they manage to do that, obviously they shorten their front line, they secure their flanks, they bring Donetsk out of artillery range, and they make sure that this railroad line here can be used again. We are reaching a point where it's getting more feasible, as it is now more or less outside of mortar range, but the further they push the Ukrainians away, the more securely they can start using that railroad link, and that will secure the supply for the whole southern front. The Russians have already built a new railroad line here. They are building one along the Azov Sea, but this is not operational yet. They have still trouble here in the Kerch Strait. We talked about the strikes against the Russian ferries there. We talked about the strikes against the Kerch Bridge in the past, but by opening a second line towards the south, they would be able to supply their whole southern flank and secure this logistics. So that's why they put such an emphasis on Vuhledar, and obviously this would not just secure the flank and the supply situation, this would also allow them to then advance further. So the Russians have refocused an area, but as of now the advances are still somewhat limited. Then Ukraine has started new investigation for another execution of prisoners of war. I think over the past few days 3 videos have popped up. I've seen 2 of them, and I'm obviously not going to show them here. YouTube wouldn't be too happy with this, and I don't want to confront you with this if you're not interested in it. If you are, you probably can find them fairly easily. In those cases, disarmed Ukrainians were simply executed by the Russians. Right now, the Ukrainians, from what I saw, are investigating the execution of at least 62 prisoners of war that had been hors de combat until the Russians killed them. Then we have rumors currently spreading around that Igor Girkin, or Igor Strelkov, as his nom de guerre was released from prison to fight in Ukraine. He was recently sentenced to 4 years in prison for extremism. He was the first so-called defense minister of the so-called Donetsk People's Republic, a former Russian agent who started the war in eastern Ukraine by crossing over the border with Russian citizens to start the fighting there. He has been a mill blogger since then and has been highly critical of the Russian government. His analysis were actually often on the point, because he did not hold back with criticism towards the Russian armed forces, and that led to his imprisonment. According to some rumors, he's now being released to fight in Ukraine, but his wife denied that. She said that's not true, and extremism is a charge where you cannot be released to fight along the front line. So unclear as of now. We'll have to observe it in the future. In troop generation, we have here a video of the Ukrainians testing a glide bomb, a domestically developed one. We see a Sukhoi 24M here, and this is the glide bomb under it. Now, this is a test run. This does not mean it will have to be used from the Sukhoi 24. It probably can be used from MiG-29 and Sukhoi 27 as well, but obviously it has proven to be highly effective for the Russians to cheaply build big numbers, and the Ukrainians are trying to do that as well. And if we look at this here, it feels like this should be a rocket engine in the end. This seems to be an opening here, a muzzle, more or less, a funnel, and instead of just having the fins and end the bomb there, it seems to be an opening. So it seems like those bombs will be rocket assisted, a very smart move, obviously, to increase the range and thus save rare material, rare planes. And the Ukrainian Air Force to this video also said that this was a plane that was initially mothballed, that they modernized and refurbished, which is now in operation. So this is one of the planes that was not flying at the beginning of the war. But we have more good news. We have the Defense Secretary of the United States saying here, meanwhile, with the help from several European countries, the United States is working with Ukraine to design and build a substitute for the S-300 surface-to-air missile system and the R-27 air-to-air missile. Now, the R-27 is more or less a Russian equivalent of the AIM-120 MRAM. You could call it this way, even though the Ukrainian versions do not have active radar homing. They are only semi-active radar homing, and Ukraine only has a limited stock of each, and the S-300 have more or less run out. So restarting some kind of production to allow the Ukrainians to both keep using their fighter bombers in an air-to-air role and to allow their S-300 systems to keep operating would obviously be a massive improvement for the Ukrainians. And then we have a new video showing the flamethrower drones. They are sometimes being called the Dragon drones. Here we see them. It's supposed to be thermite that is being dropped off. I cannot confirm it as of now, and I wonder how the drone would survive the heat of it, but at least that's how it's being said. And we see it flying around here, and then we see the effect of it as it starts fires that will obviously burn down the forests, at least if the current weather allows for it, but also it will cause problems to the Russian soldiers on the ground. We have a video here from the Russians of a position that was struck with it, and you can see the rifles seem to be burnt up completely. We see that any air cover that allowed those soldiers to hide is gone. We see cars in the background being burning wrecks. So here the Ukrainian Dragon drones or flamethrower drones have shown their full effect and caused significant damage to the Russians. I think that was a burnt motorcycle. We see the effect this has as of now. Then we have news from international aid. The US are sending a new aid package of $250 million. RIM-7 missiles are, those are Sea Sparrows. They are in huge supply and have been, and Ukrainian air defense systems, Buk and Kup, have been modified to fire them. Then we have Stinger, also air defense, shoulder-fired ammunition for the HIMARS, 155, 105 millimeter shells, and anti-tank weapons. New Bradleys, new M113s, new MRAMs. Those, I think, are the most important things, that they receive new armored vehicles, which are obviously badly needed. Then there are discussions that the parts of the Congress try to make Biden use the presidential drawdown authority, because 6 billion, some numbers are saying 6.2 billion are left that he has not even used yet, and they are going to expire on September 30th. So if they are successful, Ukraine can expect a significant aid package fairly soon, but we'll have to see. We shouldn't remember that Biden has not even used 1 cent out of the 47 billion for the Ukraine Lend-Lease Act. A lot of the potential aid that could have been given to Ukraine was not used by the current US government. Then we have a news from the United Kingdom that the UK deliver 650 Martlet missiles. They are multifunctional missiles that can be used for air to ground, ground to ground, as well as ground to air. They're actually able to shoot down air targets. There are over supersonic missiles, over 1.5 Mach they can fly, and have a range of roughly 8 kilometers in range. So this is what they can achieve, and 650 of them are being promised by the United Kingdom. And finally, we have a video showing us yeah, I think it speaks for itself. That's a Ukrainian soldier and a Ukrainian Mi-8, and it defines how low flying can actually work inside of Ukraine better. It was smart from him to lie down, because otherwise he probably would have been hit. This seems to be less than 2 meters in altitude where this pilot is flying here. But that's it from me for now. If you enjoyed this situation report, please give it a thumbs up. It really helps with the algorithm. Leave a comment in the comment section. What do you think about the current developments? And if you're new here, I would like to invite you to subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon so you don't miss future videos. This channel is only possible because of the support of viewers like you. If you'd like to support the channel, you can do so by the means in the description. But that's it from me for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll be back.